Hello, my phenomenal Algebra 1 students. Let's have another summer adventure together. Today, we will solve a quadratic equation using factoring. Quadratic equations have the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Notice that the largest exponent of the variable x is a 2. The a, b, and c are real numbers, with the a not being equal to 0. We're going to use the zero factor theorem that says if a times b equals 0, then a equals 0 or b equals 0. And here are some examples of quadratic equations. And notice again that the largest exponent of the variable is a 2. We're now going to be looking at some examples where we're going to solve each quadratic equation using factoring. Well, the first equation is the quantity 4x minus 3 times the quantity 2x plus 4. Notice it's already in factored form. So all we have to do is set each factor containing a variable, set it equal to 0. So you see I set each factor containing a variable equal to 0. I'm going to undo adding 3 here. Undo subtracting 3 by adding 3 rather. Undo adding 4 by subtracting 4. And you can follow this as we go along. We come down here, we have 4x equals 3, 2x equals negative 4. We're going to undo multiplying by 4, undo multiplying by 2. And when we do that, we end up with x is equal to 3/4 and x is equal to negative 2. And remember now, as you're watching this video, you can stop, rewind, review anytime that you need to. Let's look at another example. This time we're going to be looking at 2x squared equals 12x. When we solve this by factoring, we want the one side to be equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 12x from both sides. When I do that, I get the 2x squared minus 12x equals 0. I take out my greatest common monomial factor, which is 2x. I then set each factor containing a variable equal to 0. See, 2x equals 0. Then I have or the x minus 6 equals 0. Undo multiplying by 2 by dividing by 2. Undo subtracting 6 by adding 6 to both sides. When we do that, we're going to end up with x equals 0 and x equals 6. Let's look at another example. Here, again, this side is not equal to 0, so we're going to subtract 4 from each side, because when we're solving the quadratic equation, one side has to be equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 4 from each side. We'll end up with x squared plus 10x plus 24 equals 0. There's a 1 right here. So that means that we only need to look at the factors of c, which is 24. So we want here two numbers that you multiply together to give us 24, which will be 6 and 4. But they have to add up to give us the b, which is 10. See, 6 plus 4. So I put these terms, you see, in our two parentheses, the x plus the 6. Then we have the x plus the 4. I then set each factor containing a variable. I set it equal to 0. Here I undo adding 6 by subtracting 6. Undo adding 4 by subtracting 4. And when I get through, we're going to have x equals negative 6 and x equals negative 4 is our example. As our solutions, rather. As our solution. So here, let's look at another example. Here, we have a negative 1 for the a. It's usually easier to solve these equations when the a is a positive number. So I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by negative 1. When I do that, you see what I have here. Then, since there's a 1 here, I only need to look at the c. I look for two numbers if we multiply together to give us a negative 6 and 1. But they have to add up to give us the b, which is negative 5. And you see, it adds up to give us the negative 5. So I put the negative 6 and the plus 1 inside the parentheses. So here I have my two binomial factors here. Then I'm going to set each factor containing variables, set it equal to 0. We're going to undo subtracting 6 by adding 6. Undo adding 1 by subtracting 1. When we do that, move this down so you can see it. We're going to get x is equal to 6 and x is equal to a negative 1. Okay. Then we're going to look at another example. This time the example that we're looking at, the A is not a 1. And we're going to be using our X box method that we talked about. So here we have to look at the quadratic equation here. We have that the A is 3, the B is -7, and the C is a -20. Here is our X, and we have to determine which number, how to put these numbers in the X. Well, in this part of the X is A times C. See, 3 times -20. In this part of the X, it is the B term right here. See, that's the B term. That's right here. In fact, I'll just put the B term right there. Okay, and this was the AC term. Now, remember, we're now going to look at 60, the A times C. We want two numbers that multiply to give us a -60, but they have to add up to give us this B. And those factors will be -12 and 5. -12 plus 5, -7. -12 times 5 is a -60. Now, here we have our numbers in our X. Now we're going to go to our box. So right here, when we have this box, in the upper left-hand corner, we put the AX squared. Remember, the AX squared is what? 3x squared. And then in this part of the box, we put the -20. You see, the C was what? The -20. And the 12, the -12 and the 5, remember where we got those from? Over here, we got the -12 and the 5. Now, notice that I've added an X here. I added an X to the -12 and an X to the 5 because we want those two terms to add up to give us a -7x. And we're going to be looking for this number on the outside of the box and this number on the outside of the box. Let's look at our first row. Rows always go from left to right. Let's factor out the greatest common factor from these two terms in the first row, and it's going to be X. Then we're going to look at our first column. We'd like to factor out the greatest common factor from the terms in the first column. And columns always, again, go up and down. It's going to be 3x. And then we're going to find this number. We know that x times 3x is 3x squared. We say x times what number gives us 5x? And we know it's going to be 5. Then we're going to look at, we know that 3x times x is 3x squared. Then we're going to say, well, 3x times what number gives us a -12x? And it's going to be a -4. But let's look at this again in a little bit more detail. Here we have the box where I filled it in just a little bit more. See, I put in the 5. X times what number gives us 5x? I made a little equation down here. X times what gives us 5x? Then I divide each side by x, and I get the missing number is 5, which is just what I put here. Then here it's going to be 3x times what number gives us -12x? So I made another little equation here. 3x times what number gives us -12x? When we divide, we're going to get that number, missing number, be a -4, which is what I put here. Let's see, everything else here, what canceled out. Okay. And here then will be our factoring of that quadratic equation. See, at the top, we have that binomial, 3x plus 5. Then along the side, we have the binomial x minus 4. So this is our factored form. But we're not through because we've got to solve this quadratic equation. So this is where I took the factored form. We're now going to set each factor containing a variable. We're going to set it equal to 0. Let's look at this side first. Here, we're going to subtract 5 from each side. We get 3x equals -5. We divide each side by x. We get a -5/3. Over here, we get, subtracting 4 by adding 4, we get x equals 4. So our two answers will be -5/3 and 4. And remember, as you're viewing this video, you can always stop, rewind, review, stop, rewind, review, and thank you for watching this video.